you used the phrase emotional constipation, and I absolutely love this phrase.
I think we have such a culture in westernized culture to just keep moving. And so, this big emotion's coming up. If I just keep moving, I won't have to experience that. Yeah, shove it down. I've been through some difficult experiences and people are like, oh, just run. Just get on a treadmill until you can't think about it anymore. But also that didn't ever address and honor the pain and the struggle and those experiences. And so those emotions just keep building up and being there. And so as they've been emotionally constipated, if you will, it starts releasing. And it's messy and it's all over the place. But I think that music and the arts are really a great way to loosen you up.
Welcome to the Bountiful podcast. I'm Shan, and this is a space for curious, thoughtful conversations about what it really means to live a bountiful life. In a world that often rewards more, faster, and louder, Bountiful exists to slow things down, to explore joy, resilience, creativity, and the small choices that shape how we live every day. Each episode is a conversation with someone who's thought deeply about life, work, health, money, relationships, or purpose, and what they've learned along the way. If you're looking for ideas you can actually live with, you're in the right place. Music is one of the most powerful tools we have, and most of us aren't tapping into what it can actually do. In this episode, Emily Polichette, a neurologic music therapist at the Huntsman Mental Health Hospital in Utah, shares surprising insights about what music does to our brains and how we can harness it. We explore how music helps us access emotions that sometimes we don't have words for. Emily introduces the concept of emotional constipation, how to create playlists that actually serve your mood, and simple practices you can try at home. This conversation will change how you think about the songs you love and give you practical tools for using music to live more fully.
Emily, welcome to the Bountiful podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're here on the Bountiful podcast. Can you tell me what it means to you to live a bountiful life?
A bountiful life. I've thought about this coming to your podcast, and I think a bountiful life is one with value, one with meaning, one where no matter what life is throwing at us, that we can be present and fully engaged with our surroundings, with our experiences.
And what has meaning and value for you in particular?
For me in particular, my bountiful life comes from the outdoors, definitely arts and creation and music particularly, and then family, friends, connection. Yeah.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
Advice for my 25-year-old self is that you got to stop trying to fit in because you're not going to, and it's okay. I think that we spend a lot of our early life trying to figure out what are social norms, what are expectations, meeting other people's expectations instead of trusting and listening to ourselves of what calls to us, what's important to us, and that there's not one right way to do things.
Why did you giggle when you first answered that question? I want to dig into that.
Oh my goodness, my 25-year-old self, there's a lot I would tell my 25-year-old self. Literally, my 25-year-old self was in graduate school and unsure kind of where things would be. And I was definitely at a point where it'd been hard to find work. It was after the market crash of 2008, and I was working in restaurants, finishing up grad school, not really seeing a career in music therapy at the same time. And as I've moved to Utah, my life has flourished in a really powerful way, professionally and personally. And so I think it was a really hard time at 25.
And can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and background?
Sure. So I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. My parents were not Kentucky natives. They moved there due to the University of Kentucky. And so I grew up very much in a university community. Friends of ours growing up were from England and Boston and all sorts of different areas. Not many Kentucky natives within our close-knit circle. And we did a lot of music. My nuclear family did a lot of church music. As church musicians, my parents still sing, and my dad plays his tuba with the church choir. And we definitely went to a lot of orchestra performances, including, in the summer growing up, just the Pops concerts. And then as I learned instruments and did different things, I played in youth orchestras, Jazz Arts Foundation jazz orchestras, different things like that. Always making music and attending live concerts in a very Western formal way. And then additionally, my upbringing included, my dad's a research scientist, my mom's an educator. We spent a year living abroad when I was in first grade. So very spicy, playful first grader Emily got to flit around Europe. We were living in Switzerland and traveled quite a bit. And I think that's been deeply impactful throughout my life.
Amazing. And then what instruments did you play growing up?
Yeah, so we had a piano in the house that my mom had grown up with in New York. And I learned to play that after we got back from Europe. Piano was definitely my first standardized instrument. I expressed some interest in violin. I had it for maybe a day. And then my parents were like, I don't think so.
I wanted to play the violin when I was little, and we lived on a farm and we had a barn, and Dad was like, okay, you can play the violin, but you're also moving to the barn if you want to, which was maybe 50 meters. I don't know how many yards it is, but quite a long way from the house. And I was like, but why can't I play it in the house? He was like, nope.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that one.
Fair enough. I really was mesmerized by the trumpet. So I wanted to play the trumpet. My parents had just purchased, not that I knew it, a trumpet for me to begin learning on. And I came home from school and was like, there's this thing, it's called the cello. So I played both cello and trumpet for a number of years before then, just leaning into the trumpet. And I did quite a bit of choral work singing.
Awesome. And then what led you into music therapy where you sort of are now?
I think that I might share some of my parents' sentiment of listening to someone learn an instrument, like a violin, is not something I want to be around on a regular basis. I feel like music was very quickly and very much part of my life, and I wanted it to continue, but I did not want to teach. I had some interest in composition and creating music in that way. But when I was in an all-state band or orchestra, something like that, one of the booths was from Berklee College of Music in Boston, and the person at that booth was a music therapy student. They told me about it, and I was immediately like, oh, that's what I want to do. And so I even applied to all universities that had music therapy programs when I was looking for where I wanted to do my college studies. And while many people changed majors and interests, once I found that, it's been pretty straightforward.
So for people who have never heard of music therapy, what is it and what makes it different from just listening to music?
Yeah. So there's two major things. Number one, you've got that therapeutic relationship between the therapist and whoever the treatment participants are. And then the second piece is that we're being goal-directed. And so we have some reason that we're doing it. I think when we're listening to music or engaging in some music experiences, it's for enjoyment or pleasure or connection, or it's just right there, as opposed to being really purposeful about I'm working on my speech, or I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving voice to my emotions and my presence. I'm trying to decrease my anxiety. So being really goal-driven within that piece, but that therapeutic relationship is the other part.
Why would someone do music therapy over maybe talk therapy?
Yeah, I think that depending on what you have going on, I wouldn't say do music therapy instead of talk therapy, unless that music therapist is also trained in psychotherapy, if that's what you're looking for. But what talk therapy often relies on is just that spoken word and the ability to come up with, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I need. And I think through the process of music making, or listening, or observing, we're able to find so much more. Words really fall short.
What would a session look like? And are you trying to, is it almost sometimes the step before the emotions, they're feeling a lot and the music unlocks something, or what is sort of going on where they don't necessarily have the words, but they need to move some emotion on or something?
So within a session standpoint, often, we're just trying to assess in the beginning where someone's at and where they want to go. And so I could ask, and typical talk therapy, you might just say what's your mood? How are you feeling? Which can give information. Sometimes people think they know how they feel. We'll bring a visual piece of an emotion wheel, pick off here. But if instead we have a variety of different instruments, different sounds that people can kind of explore through, then we can get curious about, I wonder why that one connected with you in this moment. Do you think it's where you're at or what you need or what you're seeking? And I also like to ask, what song has been in your head? Or if you were to put a song or have a musician represent you today, what would that be? And that starts to get much more complex than like, I'm feeling content. I am good.
Why are we drawn to sad music or angry music or like rage music or even like uplifting and all of those stuff? Interesting.
Yeah. Music preference is really fascinating, and it has so many different cultural components as well as biological. Different people have different arousal states that are natural for them. And we could go into like what's genetic and predisposed within that and what also has to do with environmental factors in their early childhood. But someone who really wants like high intensity music, depending on the culture they come from, that can show up in so many different ways, where if they were raised in the same setting, it might be the same music.
So should we talk a little bit about the science of music therapy, what's going into it, what it does to the body?
Sure. Well, sometimes we'll just talk about music as being that whole brain or even whole body exercise. Is it whole body like some sort of like fitness routine? No. But is it activating throughout our body? Absolutely. If you just think of the brain process, when you hear music or when you make music, it's not just in one area of the brain. So if we're just looking sensory-wise, even just hearing, the way that our hearing is processed, it is all over depending on the context of what we're hearing. While vision is specifically our occipital lobe. It's got like, we've got vision and specializations within vision. But for music, you've got timing, you've got tones, you've got language, you've got rules and structure, you've got memories, you've got cultural component. It just keeps going. And so we talk a lot about it as just being that whole brain exercise. Why music and therapy is because we use those similar areas in music, production, perception, as we do for non-musical exercises. And so it's shared areas. And so we can work on those non-musical aspects through either pairing them or reinforcing similar neural substrates.
Do you have an example?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites that you can find some really, really beautiful neuroimaging on, and it's old now as science and neuroscience progress so much, but we can take a look at someone who has had like left hemisphere stroke. And so they've lost their speech sections of the brain where they're doing that. And people talk about like, oh, the right side is analogous within music rules and regulation, but we've done some neuroimaging looking at someone who has then just the whole damage through the arcuate fasciculus, which connects between our motor areas and our processing and being able to get that production and the words out. And after doing music therapy, melodic intonation therapy, the right side, arcuate fasciculus, starts getting thicker and thicker and thicker through building those different neural pathways as that person in practice is starting to bring out more speech and being able to re-engage in a different way. It's totally shifted our neuroplasticity and how we're engaging. And so it feels very straightforward with that example to me.
So the types of things you're treating with music therapy could be stroke and people who have lost speech and those sorts of things, as well as like mental health issues.
So here at the Mental Health Institute, we're specifically working on mental health. But one of the things with mental health is anyone can have struggles in mental health and anyone can have struggles in substance use disorders. And so we see everything. And so as we have folks come in, they may have injury to different areas. They may be in a later stage within a neurodegenerative disease. And so there's any number of different pieces. And if you want to support the holistic person, like the whole self, we're going to address that. If you can't move around, that's going to make it harder for you to find that wellness and connection. If communication isn't happening, that's going to be really important.
Yeah, interesting. Is it worthwhile maybe just chatting about how music therapy can help someone in mental health?
So what I see with people coming in at our hospital is a lot of times there's either suicidal intent or their post-suicide attempt. We'll see really, really a lot of anxiety. I always tell either new clinicians or the students I work with, when in doubt, when you don't know what to work on, everyone could use more support on managing anxiety, which is not a bad thing. I like to point out the protective factors of anxiety, but whether that's what brings them in or just being in a hospital can be a really anxious setting to be in. We're always addressing that. And then we've also got, within different psychotic disorders, just wanting to bring people into that present moment awareness. So with the different presentations that people bring coming into the hospital, I'm going to use music to either provide that grounding and foundation to make it feel more comfortable and accessible. I really like working on attention. They'll have lots of different meetings, and as different things may be coming up, they're going to meet with different treatment team members, and being able to categorize the information they have and train that into their brain, but then also remember, these are my questions that I have. I want to make sure I talk to my provider about this. That doesn't happen without attention. Just like mindfulness is kind of a foundational coping skill for many other than higher level thoughts. So teaching and engaging mindfulness practices is really important. But when we have on our units people singing together or making music together, all of a sudden it went from being like, I'm here in this crisis by myself and no one else knows my experience and I don't know who these weirdos are, to then like building community amongst this group of strangers that they're in all these group therapies with to feel more comfortable.
I'm not alone, it's less scary.
Yeah.
We're all here together for some reason.
Yeah. I find that I'm often pointing out, like, whether someone has a name tag on or a wristband on, everyone's there with their own experience to support connection.
So you described music therapy and helping with non-musical goals. Can you give us a real-world example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so whether it's how to cope outside of a panic attack, something like that coming up, or to start identifying that, what can I do to prevent that from happening? I love helping people just kind of find better ways to express themselves and build connection, whether it's playlists. Playlists are classic with music therapists, and many people do this without a music therapist's guidance. But that idea of helping someone really be mindful and thoughtful, intentional about the music that they're picking and how it can support them. If consistently getting up in the morning is hard for you, what's going to help support you within that? And if you feel like people in your family don't understand you, whether that's with youth or whether that's anywhere generationally, make some music together. Not necessarily like making music together. If you can, then definitely always recommend that. But having that like record pull and like sharing back and forth, like, you know, when I'm feeling stressed out, this song helps me. And then with that other person in your life, they listen to it and then they can ask questions. And then likewise, if they've listened to your music, you listen to their music. And I think especially cross-generationally, that's a really nice way to connect and build more understanding.
Yeah, I really love this thing is like music being used for mindfulness so you can focus in, and maybe like a lot of mental health and whatnot is all like your brain running away from you, or you're dissociating from your body and your brain, like all the sorts of things. So having a mindfulness practice that's maybe not like meditating, but instead is like, which some people can find like doesn't suit them, or maybe is a little bit woo-woo, whereas like listening to a playlist or just listening to some music or even like making your own music. I don't know if I've ever really thought about it as being like a mindfulness practice.
Yeah. I mean, even in many of the very still, and you sit there like that or other sounds that people may be making, that's having that stillness and connection with the music. But mindfulness is just paying attention on purpose right now. So whether we're stuck in thinking about the past and what just happened, or like really, really anxious and worried about what's going to happen in the future, if you can just be mindful right now, try to pick out what are the instruments I hear in there? What's the melody line? Does this have a harmony or not? Even like yes, no, like very simplistic things to pay attention to on purpose. I love that. Can I walk to this song? Can I switch? Is my toe tapping? Noticing how our body's responding to it. Sometimes I like putting like a pulse ox on my group's hand so they can see in real time, and they're not like the medical grade. It's not for really collecting vitals, but within that instrument, did your oxygen go up or down, but much more so, like, did your pulse change?
So when we talked, you used the phrase emotional constipation, and I absolutely love this phrase. So how do you use music to help someone move through blocked emotion?
Yeah, and I wish I could take credit for that. I don't know where I first heard that, but I think as I've reflected on this, I think we have such a culture in westernized culture to just keep moving. And so, this big emotion's coming up. If I just keep moving, I won't have to experience that. Yeah, shove it down. I've been through some difficult experiences and people are like, oh, just run. Just get on a treadmill until you can't think about it anymore. And it's like, I mean,
Great for
kind
some
of.
people, not for others.
But also that didn't ever address and honor the pain and the struggle and those experiences. And so those emotions just keep building up and being there. We also see within whether it's substance use or other things where we find addictions that have just kind of numbed us out to those different experiences, and they're all there. So we have folks come in for like a medical detox and so forth, and as all of a sudden, all the things that kept it stuffed down aren't there anymore. It just starts bubbling up. And so as they've been emotionally constipated, if you will, it starts releasing, and it's messy and it's all over the place and will hold you safe and keep you from anything happening. But I think that music and the arts are really a great way to loosen you up.
You know how there's a lot of talk in the world now around like somatic therapy and like moving your body, and that trauma gets stuck in your hips, and like, I'm not diminishing those things by all means.
Absolutely not.
But is it possible for someone, if they're not doing like a clinical setting of music therapy, but they know that they've got some emotions like kind of stuck, or that they could deal with moving on, is it as simple as like putting on some music that makes them feel things and then intentionally thinking about, I don't know, what they're experiencing? How does someone sort of maybe think about this in a home context if they can?
Yeah, I think that like if it's really intense stuff, you might want to be in a setting where you have, whether it's a music therapist or some other sort of healthcare provider ready for the fallout. I mean, that's the piece, is that sometimes music can really cause harm. It can really take us somewhere we didn't want to go or we're not ready to, and much deeper than we wanted. And in a music therapy setting, often we can kind of use the music as a container to kind of wrap it back up. So someone's leaving back in that space, but having let a little bit out. But at home, I think, yeah, sometimes just being in touch with that. I have personally, and when I bring it up in sessions, a lot of people be like, oh yeah, I have a cry playlist, right? Like something that when I feel like I have just dulled myself out, I've been just pushing through, there's been so much happening, and I want to feel something again. Those things that I know they're going to bring that response. There's certain songs that, whether it's tied in memories or the people that it reminds us of, and there are strong emotions that can get us unconstipated, if we stick with this terminology, that aren't hard, that are like really tender, that are really loving and just beautiful.
So you've worked with a range of people, from kids to trauma survivors. What have you seen that music can unlock that nothing else could?
I think one of the things that music does is that it gives us both, Susan Rogers refers to it as like above the neck and below the neck responses at the same time. The idea that like with music, we can be in our head and in our mind and processing, but also our body is so responsive. And I don't know much else that can do that much.
So you've trained in neurologic music therapy. Can you walk us through what that actually involves?
Yeah, so neurologic music therapy it's not an approach or a model. It's a system of 20 standardized techniques. Early on, a lot of the research was primarily with music therapists and a couple additional research faculty. But at this point, neurologic music therapy has expanded to include a lot of allied health professionals and researchers to better understand how can we utilize music perception, production, and applied neuroscience in a way to support clinical settings. So it's a really fascinating group of people globally, but also really finding those techniques. So it's not just like, I noticed that if we put a beat on, that people walk more evenly. We want to know more about that and why that's doing that. And how can I replicate this in a purposeful way? And also, is it the familiar song, or is it the rhythm, or is it the pitching? Finding the real mechanisms of why these different things work. And that's what gets me so excited within it. And the really expansion within looking in the psychiatric setting, how these techniques can be utilized. Because I can say, listening to this playlist that is personalized, that this person is me, that's been really effective, or group choral singing, but why? And how can we replicate this? And through using the transformational design model to select those techniques that are going to be utilized and making sure we're keeping track of the data throughout there is really the powerful piece that makes it neurologic music therapy.
So you said why is that happening, and then replicate it. Why do you want to, like, where are you replicating it, and why do you want to replicate it? Is it so that someone can sort of like have their sessions and then do a little bit of homework at home, or like, what's happening there?
So there's a really, really cool lab out in the New England area that's even like had a off branch that's created a device. I think it's called Tandem, that can go onto your shoe. So you can utilize these techniques in a home practice. I think wearable technologies are absolutely wonderful and the future, and supporting rural communities. But being able to say, whatever type of music moves you, whatever the aesthetic is, how can we utilize this in a meaningful and purposeful way is that idea of finding the mechanism.
This is a bit off-piste, but we had a personality researcher on that did a lot of work in like beauty and awe and phenomena, those sorts of things. Have you done much work in those areas? Because I guess music can be a phenomena, which certain types of music probably. I'm thinking of like Mozart or Beethoven or one of those like, quite extraordinary piece of music. Can that draw people out of themselves? And is that part of it?
I think it can be. I think so. There's two areas I want to go within that. One is semantics. And I was trying to remember before this the name of the artist who has a really, really great video on YouTube demonstrating it, but it's how vibration and sound move matter. And so they have, as they set up on their DJ setup, there's like sand on a tray. And so as they're hitting different pitches, it creates different images and different pieces. There's like bowls of water that then the ripples change based on the bass frequencies and other things like that. When we are like engulfed in music, we're made of matter, right? And so that idea that like we're vibrating within that, I find it fascinating.
So
really
cool.
Enjoy it. Yeah. A big area of research, not just in music therapy, but in psychiatry right now, is really exploring psychedelic therapy, psychotherapy. And it has roots back in the 70s with Helen Bonney and doing guided imagery and music. And whether it was a cultural piece or truly from what the research was showing, they moved away from the psychedelics and were saying music really can put us in those mystical experiences. And Helen Bonney's work utilized a lot of symphonic works, really big pieces like you were referring to. And I do think that there's something really, really special about having those really thick orchestrated pieces of music. And I think that orchestration can translate in lots of different cultures and lots of different ways and instrumentations. But yeah, I think I get really curious about that. I definitely am not shy to have all sorts of tools available in my session. So while I do this neurologic music therapy, very specified with the techniques that I bring and how and why and how it's going to help people remember, I might also just say, oh, we got a weird vibe, and just bring in a tuning fork, strike that tuning fork, and ask everyone just to kind of hum along, bring in some singing bowls, and connect with them there. And I don't necessarily know the science behind that or feel like I need to have that justified, but I really enjoy that connection and finding that. And then being curious about why.
You mentioned these 20 techniques. Do you have a favorite or one that you're most excited about?
So one of my favorite things to work on is respiration, because it can work in someone who has had injury to the respiratory system or someone who just needs to kind of really get in touch with their body and that respiratory system and how we can do that. One of my personal favorites is bringing in a kazoo Kazoos can help remove that stigma or shame or different pieces and expectations around what your vocal quality is supposed to be like. And so it's through this technique.
What is a kazoo?
A kazoo?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have my
like
kazoo with me. No, you just hold it in your mouth and you just go, you just sing into it, and then the membrane on there vibrates.
Okay. It's kind of like a flute and a recorder, but sounds really good all the time.
It kind of distorts and changes the sound that you're making. So you put it to your mouth and then you just sing or hum into it, and then it amplifies and creates a sound that is kind of silly, but it'll maintain that pitch and that aspect. So the technique within this is the oral motor respiratory exercise. So it can be used working on holding that in place if we're working on the musculature in this area, but definitely that breath. And then singing into your kazoo, seeing how long that goes. Most people that don't have vocal training, or even maybe with some vocal training, if they have injury, don't want to just go and sing an open vowel sound in front of their new favorite stranger therapist. But you put a kazoo, we're gonna laugh a little bit, loosen up a little bit. Did you really bring in a kazoo? I did. And then have that opportunity. Likewise with oral motor respiratory exercises, you could bring in the melodica, which I feel like has made a comeback. Yep. It has the long tube that goes down on the keyboard. And depending on how many notes you're pressing, it needs a different amount of oxygen. So when someone is trying to get off-wall oxygen or wanting to expand that breath, but also if someone has just, from trauma, they continually just take those really shallow breaths, learning what does it feel like to take a diaphragmatic breath? What does it feel like to have my body fill with air and then release that in a way? So it provides a handful of different mechanisms within that. But you get that auditory feedback, which just your incentive spirometer or other respiratory tools don't give you a fun sound to kind of say, you did it.
I love that it sort of just takes it up a level where it makes it silly, playful, fun, which a lot of the time, if you're kind of in a lot of these situations or in a negative brain space, is not where you're at. And so a little bit of levity. I also love that you're working on your respiratory system, and like breath is one of the most important things for people with anxiety. If they learn how to breathe better, they can, well, you're the therapist, but
no, this is great.
breath is so important. But I kind of like that it's like, well, you just need to learn to breathe. You're like, no, play this instrument and you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, our breath is also something we take with us anywhere. So as much as we can do working on breathing exercises, I feel like the more transferable it is, the more we can take that out of the session as well.
A life dream would be to learn how to play the harmonica, but isn't it one of the hardest ones to learn?
You know, that's a really great question. So harmonica, fun enough, I've been able to play at a basic level most any instrument I've picked up, but the harmonica has plagued me. It's been really hard because there's like the different sounds going out and in and where it places, but lots of people just pick it up and play.
Yeah, and make random sounds.
Yeah, and you can get pitched ones that are particular to different keys. There were some bluegrass jams I used to play at, and someone would come with their case full of harmonicas, and all they wanted to know, which key are we in? And once they had that, they were ready to go.
So cool. And it's little.
It's little, yeah. Great for backpacking.
So going back into some of the science, why is the brain so responsive to music? Can we talk a little bit about what's actually happening neurologically when we hear or create music?
Yeah. And throughout our body, our neurologic system, our central nervous system, and peripheral nervous system are going to be engaged. I think it's really neat thinking about how something like the timing and sequencing is being processed in the cerebellum and some different areas of the brain, but even just watching music. Like if you're a trained pianist and then you sit and you watch someone else play a piece of music you've played before, your motor area is just lighting up. It's just going off. Like you're not even actually doing that. When we're having the different language processing and those different aspects, it's that whole brain exercise like we had talked about earlier. But we'll see changes in heart rate, in respiration, the deepness within that. As music therapists, sometimes we really utilize that watching monitors classic examples are like in a NICU setting, working with babies who are still on monitors, and we want to make sure that their heart rate is up where it needs to be or not too high and bringing it back down, and how we can shift and adjust music through tempo, through timbre, through complexities or lack of complexities to affect that response. The piloerection is the chills, right?
Yep.
So we experience chills with something, which is empathy building. And that coming from music is also just finding those biological pieces that we have as a response to music.
Why do things like tempo and timing, I know I keep asking for examples, but like, what is the example of like tempo and its impact or timing and its impact?
Yeah, so it's the personal biology and experience that's really going to drive that.
Right.
I think what we're seeing more than anything is that if it is relaxing, it's going to decrease those things. If it's arousing or activating, it's going to increase them. But what to one person is activating and to another person is relaxing can be really different, which is where then we're like, this is why you have a music therapist if it's in a clinical setting. But for your average listener, thinking about, I have people make logs sometimes of like, as the song plays, what do you notice? Where do your thoughts go? What does your heart rate do? What does your breath do? Because we're unique, every single one of us. The same music can have a different response.
There's only one genre of music that I literally cannot handle. Can you guess what it is?
From what I've gotten to know of you so far, I don't know. Is it like screaming?
Yeah. That just makes me like nearly have a panic attack whenever I hear it. I like have to get out of Dodge. I'm like, I need to not be listening. I don't know what it does. I think it maybe just alienates my entire being listening to screaming music.
Yeah, it is a fascinating genre.
Yeah.
I was at a presentation on Sunday actually with our Center for Vocology, where they're studying and looking at extreme vocalizations within deathcore metal music. And deathcore, these are things that I learned on Sunday, so I hope they're accurate enough. But deathcore has like no melody line to the screams. And so within the vocal examples they used for this one, deathcore musician who came in and got scoped. So I got to watch like their whole like vocal cords and that whole area as they made these growls and pig squeals and describe things in their own language. But I thought it was cool that they said that this person had started when they were very young. And so that's part of how they could make the sounds. And they have this like turn that they make, and some people crouch. And I don't know that you could make that or get into that if you weren't exposed to it when you were young. I've always been like, when patients are like, oh, you have a lot on here, but you don't have this or you don't have that. And I'm like, you don't want to hear my attempt at screaming. It's just, it'll be cheesy. But yeah, people really love metal music, and they talk about the community and when you go to the concerts and the other instrumentation within there. I keep doing this for instrumentation. It's usually more like this. It's high level of accuracy. A lot of very, very classically trained musicians go into it, but it's definitely not for everyone.
I wasn't meaning to be offensive to anyone. I just
No,
can't handle it.
I mean, when people are like, oh yeah, I find it so relaxing, I'm like, I don't, but I do find it very arousing for my cognition. Right. I would not personally choose to listen to it outside of probably a learning for a client kind of context.
Random question. You just mentioned that you're doing this today rather than this. What does that say about how you're showing up today?
Oh, what does that show? I don't know.
Not being a therapist, but I was like, that's fascinating. It's like, do you have different zones when you're playing your different instruments?
I think that's such a fun and interesting question. I tell people because piano was my first proper instrument. Whenever I think about music theory or like, where am I going? Which I think a lot of the times when I'm thinking about the neuroscience of music, I'm thinking about the pitches and those different aspects. I've never thought about that fun question. I think it's because that's where my brain processes what is music and how do I put that together.
What do you think music's role is in living a bountiful life?
I don't really see a life without music. A bountiful life, I had said before, of just like being present, being in your values and slowing down And I think that whenever I do that, music is there for me. And so music's role in a bountiful life, I think, is recognizing what I'm doing. And then, as I even mentioned for my 25-year-old self, to trust in that, right? What is the music advising me to do? And kind of getting into the wisdom of that, of listening to myself.
How do you do that in practice? Because it's like deeply insightful, but I feel like maybe you've honed that.
Yes, and it's definitely still in process, right? So that idea of also being like, don't worry about what other people think and stop trying to please people, and all those things is definitely a constant practice. One of my favorite interventions that I would say, now that I have been far away from music school, my music school friends would always be fine with little interventions in our camping trips and so forth, but current friends not so much. But I love listening to a heartbeat and then making music out of it. So sometimes in application and for myself is kind of the like, oh my gosh, there's so much happening. Like stillness, quiet, tranquility allow me to kind of go in a bit.
I don't know why, but they just reminded me of wind chimes.
Yeah, I love it.
Ding, 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 ding. Like nature. Why do you think voice is such a vulnerable and powerful tool for healing?
Voice is part of our body. It's part of our identity. Our voice is used for communication, and when that's not working, that makes it hard. But also, we have to take care of our voice to have it be present, right? So like if my trumpet gets hurt or if it's not present, then I can be like, oh, it's just the trumpet. When I'm not taking care of myself and my voice isn't working, it's much more raw. It's much more, oh, my voice didn't work. And I think that there's comfortable and uncomfortable things about that, and exploring that and how we're tending to our bodies and our self-care, and that idea that like, if this is going to be your instrument and your form of communication and connection, we have to care for it. And our voice doesn't like high acids in our diet. Our voice doesn't like a smoky environment. Our voice doesn't like being dehydrated. All sorts of things where we could say, oh, I know that those are things I should do more of or less of. And I think that there's a vulnerability in that. People also talk about post-trauma, that people lose their voice, right? I think that there's things to get curious about within that, but there's also that tightness.
Is silence ever part of your therapeutic work?
Sometimes to point out that there's so much sound around us and that it's hard to escape, and then finding within what we perceive of as silence to allow in that awareness of what is happening around us. But music is organized sound, and I think silence is as much sound as the vibrative quality that does come through. I think that we need silence to appreciate music and sound. And silence is a powerful tool to honor what's been happening. So after a song, I usually try to wait, let everything ring out, reverberate, and then a little bit more before then going in and getting curious about the experience and talking to folks about that.
So for someone who doesn't play an instrument or sing, what's the best way for them to use music as a kind of personal therapy or ritual, or even just to bring them joy or peace?
Yeah. Well, when you load it just as like, oh, they don't sing or play an instrument, I was like, dance, move, play. Yeah. But that idea of if someone is like, oh, I don't know about that. Our playlist is my first go-to, and it's more accessible than ever. But for really finding how to do that, also getting curious, am I not playing an instrument or singing because I have some preconceived notion? But also, it's okay if you don't want to. It's totally fine. I was raised with some people in my life who would always say, every musician needs people to play the radio. And sometimes the people who are really involved in the music industry don't play anything. Some composers have never played an instrument. So get out of your head, get out of judgment around that. You can be the biggest fan for something and never need to pick up an instrument or sing along. But checking in with yourself. There's also, the auditory pieces of like the chimes or a bell that people use in meditative practices for grounding and being present to that. So if you're like, I kind of want to explore in a different way, then you can use that. But I think a lot of people use music not in production, but in that perceptive piece of how they are putting on music or setting a mood somewhere or accompanying them running.
So I know that you're part of a few research projects. Can you tell us a little bit about the Yazidi women that you work with in Iraq? What did music do for them that nothing else could?
Yeah, so the Amar Foundation comes out of England and has had a handful of different collaborations, but they've been working throughout the world in a handful of different settings where people are in some of the most dire situations. So the Yazidi women are one of the groups that they've worked with. And these particular women have experienced unbelievable violence, sexual assault, repeated sexual assaults, and genocide towards their people and an attempted erasure of their entire culture. It's a very, very sad situation to be within. So they live in these internally displaced camps, and Amar has come through trying to promote increasing dignity and agency, hope amongst the people. And so they've brought in opportunities to learn business skills, language, and then also trying to engage within the arts and different things like that. And they found through discussion, and these women are being paid to engage in any of these different aspects, that after they would be sewing in like one of those industry building experiences, it would take them out of their mind and they could focus in the moment on what they were doing. But the moment the sewing machine stopped, that trauma was right back, that hardship, that like total shutdown. But when they were bringing people together to share in their music, to share together and singing, and always with their bringing back and making sure that we're keeping track of, or they are keeping track of their own music, their cultural music, because they were a community that really utilized music and song. That lasted after the choral practice, after they went and did performances in different places. And so the project that I've been involved with has been a team of researchers across the different disciplines of the University of Utah saying, why is that? So it's absolutely like taking that indigenous wisdom that we find cross-culturally across the globe of people coming together and healing through music, but saying for these people who have had this horrific experience, why is the music doing that when other things didn't? And getting curious about that.
Do you have any answers yet?
Oh, no, definitely not. But theories, right? So we have things being curious about that belonging of being in a community, but seeing their improved self-grooming. All of a sudden they're wanting to bathe more and wear makeup and brush their hair and get dressed. If you or any of your listeners have experienced clinical depression, these are things that are not important when everything is so hard. So really seeing the sustained synergy coming out of it has been powerful. In addition to curiosity of how can we utilize AI to do these like cross-global studies. So they have phones, devices, and so there's some different AI that's coming up where they could talk into it and just kind of give their mood check-in, and then that can provide data of what are likely physiological markers that are happening before and after choral singing and sustained. So lots of questions, but I think there's that human knowing, but we want to know more so that we can garner funds to make things like this happening in more places.
What role do you think music plays in collective healing or identity, in particular songs passed down?
Yeah, I think that idea of ancestral knowing is really powerful. I really like reading some different works that are talking about trusting our ancestors and what we've had within there, and whether it's the diet that really our bodies are made to do. I think that there's also that piece of like what music is our body meant to move to dance to commune with. Through the passing down of that, we honor both the past and moving into the future in a way that we're not supposed to be alone. Yeah. There's that idea within self-compassion of our our common humanity, and knowing that whether it's our grandparents or our children or great-great-grandparents, that there's this common need for coming together, that there's this common need of being playful. There's this common need of maybe utilizing our voices to come together.
What is something that's in your personal toolkit for hard days or tough seasons?
Personal toolkit. My mornings need a really gentle wake up. I don't like I don't like harsh alarms and sounds, even though that's what wakes my partner up. But I like it really soft and gentle, and then into something more rhythmic. My favorite is actually from the ending credits of Moulin Rouge from forever ago, but it just starts really gentle, and then it gets into more of a beat. So often from more like electronic music, I can find something that's gentle in that way. Same with when I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm going to use something just really disconnected that I'm not familiar with. So then my Western trained brain's not trying to figure out, what do I hear? What's happening here? And just kind of let it be. But I need to get stuff done playlists that are like funk and playful and silly. And then the songs, as I mentioned earlier in this interview, that are like let's pull these emotions out. I just feel like I need to honor them. I like making music toolkit wise, not necessarily playing recorded music, but those simple sing-alongs. Huge Pete Seeger fan and the new Bob Dylan movie. But what I think about more than anything is when I was having my two children, and that there's that process of literally having a baby where you have enormous pain. And I was like, I'm a music therapist. I'm gonna use music to get through this. And then you have this like wait time in between because it takes forever. And then you have like your push time when it's like, all hands on deck, let's do this. And my pain perception was often just something to like, that's where I had like a heartbeat sound, or like the singing bowls and different things like that, where I would just kind of like hum. And as they were placing different needles in me and really, really painful stuff, it was like humming and guttural like vocalizations into that. But then the push stuff, I just wanted like feminist, strong women singing anthems. Here we go. Let's come together now. And I think that was a big utilization of music in my own toolkit.
I love that. I think people are going to want your pregnancy playlist listening to that.
And if you do go on Spotify or different ones, you'll find all sorts of birth playlists. And I worked with a doula who's also a music therapist, who had lots of suggestions and practicing with it.
Have you seen music help people reflect or make meaning of their lives in any way?
I would say yes, but I think it's particular for each person. Finding meaning, I think some people just put on music and they're like, I don't know, I like it, I like the radio. But some people it's like, oh, this is everything. And so they use it to build their community and their culture, and in a very, very Western way.
I have this one, I love like house remixes. And I have this one that's 11 minutes long, perfect for 3Ks. Mm-hmm. And there's this one part that is in the like wallow of the waiting between the two and the second and third K, which when it starts getting hard. Yeah. And he does this sound, which I just think is so funny. It's like in the middle of the song, and then I giggle and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Quick fire questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What in your opinion is the most underrated fruit or vegetable?
I'm going with green onions.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
Green onions really add so much to so many different dishes, whether it's hot pot, whether it's tacos, whether it's a salad or a baked potato. But nobody stops and talks about like, oh, these green onions really added a lot. Or if it's cilantro, which also would go into any of those dishes lovely, then everyone's like, oh, do you think cilantro tastes like soap? And they'll have like a whole discussion around it. It's like every time, I like cilantro, I hate cilantro. But green onions, nobody talks about green onions.
The unsung hero of a lot of dishes.
Yeah.
If you drink, what's your favorite cocktail?
I like something with bubbles. So whether it's like a French 75 or like an Aperol Spritz, I think that always makes it fun and special.
Amazing. Worst meal that your parents made you eat?
So I couldn't think of one. And then I asked my parents, And they were like, yeah, I don't know. My mom had lived in a couple different places. And we grew up in a really international community, and we were always taught to say something's interesting if we didn't like it. We weren't forced to eat anything in my memory, but we tried everything. So I just remember being like, oh, pizza can have a salad on it. And I had my favorite meal of all time was like the strawberry meal in Prague when I was a child, and that's all they had was strawberries. And it was like strawberry dumplings and fresh strawberries and strawberries with sugar. And that was dinner. But there's no food or meal that I hated, though I eventually stopped eating meat, which was more just my personal decision. Yeah. And they were okay with that.
Yeah. Word that describes your life?
Full.
What are you most proud of?
My kids.
Do you have any tenets or principles that you live by?
I think there's like the slow down and very much lead with kindness.
That's a popular one. Yeah. Across the group. What is one thing that's really mattered in your life that you didn't realize mattered as much at the time?
I think something that's really mattered has been family and connection.
And then the inverse, what's something that you thought mattered but realized that it doesn't?
Fitting in. I think it's that piece that I was never going to fit in, so.
Why do you think that?
That I didn't fit in?
Yeah, and like, I don't know, where does the pressure to fit in come from? And then
I think for me, a lot of it goes into my neurotype. And so I got later in life autism diagnosis, and that kind of gave me a different frame of seeing myself, and also why, like, when I would try to conform, it didn't really feel authentic or natural. And so then I had kind of some more explanation for that. And it gave me a lot more grace.
So did you have a bit of judgment and then that turned into grace?
Yeah, and I think, so a common thing that we see with unmasked or with masked autistic folks is that we're camouflaging. Like, particularly being assigned female at birth, like I can blend in, but I'm not me. But I'm really good at that. But then after a while, it's exhausting and I'm really tired. Instead, if I'm just myself, that's enough. And people do want something different. People aren't looking for everyone to have the same shared experience. And whether you're going into the arts, I mean, in arts, obviously, if every musician sounded the same, that's the fear, right? For everything to like become this like
homogenous.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is a simple habit that made your life better?
Drinking more water.
That's the second time I've heard that today. Must be a Utah thing.
Well, it's very dry here.
What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? I think variation, curiosity, things that make my brain feel tickled, new information, new experiences. I really like traveling. I like finding simple little things in my garden. I love the high altitude mountains where like everything had to put so much effort into like the little bit of their existence and just really finding beauty in that.
You seem like a very grateful person.
I try.
Thank you, Emily, for coming on the Bountiful podcast. It's been so wonderful to share some space with you, to hear your insights and a bit of your journey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lovely conversation.